Hello, today we have 5 projects we did from one sheet of decoupage paper. It's the new design from Autumn Sage Creations called Angelic Rose. The first is this vintage, just a little box. I liked the green already, and I thought it would work just to put the paper on, but we ended up having to paint it, you'll see later. So first thing we did is put a coat of white underneath where we know we're putting the paper. And I'm using the wet tear method where you just put a little bit of water on with your paintbrush, draw your line, and then tear. I use DIY liquid patina as the decoupage medium. You can use anything. A thinner one with the tissue paper is nice. And then a piece of saran wrap to help smooth it out. If it's thicker paper, I do like a thicker decoupage medium, but with the thin paper, just like with a napkin, it's nice to have the thinner. You get less bumps and bubbles and stuff. And here we're just smoothing over the edge so that I can get that line. I wanted to save as much of the paper as I could, so I just creased it, painted the water line, and then tore it. Sanded a little bit later off the edge. And then here I wanted to keep the dress to come around. I didn't want any of that to get cut off. So the part that I'm going to put on top will be the dress. Painting a little bit of white underneath there because I need that white for the dress to look nice and bright. Even though it looked like I was painting white, I was actually putting on the patina for my decoupage medium. And here I tried to fold it over top, and you'll see I ended up not liking the look of them laying so much on top of each other because it showed too much, so I'll go back later and tear it. You'll see that though. In case you're new, this is Beth from Ampy's Attic, and you can find us here. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and we're glad you've stopped in to watch. See here, I was trimming the edge a little bit more so it wasn't so much of a layered thing there. And this was just a cute little box that we found in something that came into the shop. Somebody had found it at a yard sale or something. I'm just sanding back the white there. Wasn't quite sure what my whole process was going to be yet. But it turned out that this green didn't match quite as much as I liked, so we'll paint over it just a little darker in a little bit. And there I just went rid of a seam, and then my X-Acto knives are really sharp. You need that. I tried it before with the one that's a little bit dull, and you get like a jaggedy thing edge, but if you use a nice sharp one, it'll cut nice, and you let it dry before you do that, or you'll rip your paper. And here, the Fusion Manor green, it was a really good color to go over top. Real close to what the original was, but just a tad darker. I liked it, but not quite enough, so it's getting close. And this is the Luxe Bronze Metallic and a resin casting of my IOD mold. Putting it on the front to have just a little embellishment, almost like, on those old boxes. Normally it would be a keyhole, and this black chiffon glaze from Paint Couture helps deepen that color a little bit more and pull it in with that paper. Those 2 little roses reminded me of maybe like a cameo type look or like an old pin like my grandmother used to wear. So put them right there in the middle using the patina. I needed a second coat of bronze just to darken it up a little bit because you could still see some white shining through. And the zinc metallic glaze I used instead of the regular black, just so it would still have a little bit of shine. See, you put it on and you just dab it back. It gets it down into the crevices and the low spots, and then that bronze still shines out a little bit. Just gives it enough little aging, not too bright. Type on quick and thick as usual. And that's just some of the Extreme Guard gloss that I put on there just to brighten that up. This was just a little jar from like the Dollar Tree. And that's Paint Couture's Crust to use as a texture medium. And just, you can see I pounced it all around the jar. And my crust was getting a little thick, so it went on sort of thick. So you can see I was able to just scrape it off because I noticed it all before it was drying. And then I just spread out. And the next day, here I am, I'm measuring out another piece from that paper. I like that big soft rose, but I had an idea to decoupage over texture. I did need the top edge to actually be straight or straighter, so that's why. So I laid it out on a piece of plastic just from a package that we had, misted that with water. And this time I used the Paint Couture Decoupage Medium because it's a little thicker, and I thought getting down on the texture, I would probably need that. When you mist the paper, it does make it easier to reposition it. So I started by putting the medium onto the jar itself, and then put the paper on and we pounce it in with that stencil brush. But then I thought it would be better to probably put it onto the paper, because as I was trying to get it down into all those little crevices, I was worried I was missing spots. I got off screen a tiny little bit, but you can see I just pounced over all the spots to get it down into all those crevices. And I let it overlap a little bit. Not too much. But the colors were blending nice, even overlapped, so I did leave an overlap. And then I went around and I water tore all the edges along the bottom, and then just made sure those edges rounded over nice enough to cover all the texture medium. And then around the top edge, there was a slight curve, so I had to like cut some little slits so they could overlap tiny little bits. And I don't know if you can see, if you need to really see how it's done, I think you could slow it down and see, but it was just teeny tiny little slits to let that curve be made. This jar had a tiny little chip in the rim, so I knew I had to do something to cover it. Otherwise, I think it would have laid smooth enough that I could have left the top clear, which I think I might have liked. But knowing I had to cover it with clay, I probably wasn't as meticulous, but it did turn out pretty straight. So then I put another coat of decoupage medium over it, let that to dry. And then I had tried a couple of the trimmings molds and I didn't like them because they were just too thick and it was making the top bulky. So I just got out my air dry clay, rolled it with a brayer as you can see, and then I looked through the stamps to see which one would have a texture that I would like that I could press into it. The Serpentine Stamp, I just placed it over top, rolled it. I actually ended up rolling a little too hard because some of it didn't go all the way through. I just didn't like how intense the texture was in parts. It looked a little too snaky. So I smoothed it out by just rolling over it a little bit. Only in some spots. I let some of them stay a little thicker, other ones thinner. And I needed a straight edge for along the top, actually the bottom part of the clay, the top of where the paper is. So I just cut that with my X-Acto knife. I was originally going to have it look like an overlaid piece, like have the clay go all the way around and one part lay over and look like a wrapped piece of clay around it. They ended up blending together and you can't see it. But what my reasoning was that I didn't want the clay to shrink back and end up with a gap that I'd have to try to fill in later. And this overlapping it prevented it. And the clay was rolled pretty thin, so it didn't get too bulky. I just rolled the clay over the top. I trimmed around that inside edge to make it relatively straight, but then I also flattened it some more down in there so it would almost smooth down into the glass below it. Just when you're working it, you want to not press too hard so that you don't push your design out of it on the outside, but here I had lost some, you can see, so I actually used that X-Acto knife to put some of it back in. I'd like to paint clay right away, so I think it helps it to not crack as much. So here I use the Paint Couture Italian Ivory. Their colors, I think, matched the paper very well. My plan originally was to do a little bit of it green, a little bit of it white. Then the green was a little dark and thick, and I couldn't see how it was going to just match enough with the paper this way. So then I decided to try to mist it with water and have it be almost two-toned. So yep, I just spritzed it with water and then dabbed it back with the paper, and it let both colors shine through. They were a little too bright though at this point. So the next step was to use some of the glazes to just tone it down a little bit, blend it in with the paper below it. So I used Van Dyke Brown, Amber Honey, and some of the Verde Green, just tiny little bits. Just to get it to blend better with the papers underneath. And there was a few spots on the decoupage paper where the texture was thicker, so it basically put a little tiny tear in the paper, so I had to somehow get that bright white to come off of there, so I used a little bit of the glaze to do that, but it was only in a couple tiny spots. Okay, I think it turned out pretty good. So for the third piece, we just have a thrifted frame. We got it from like a garage sale or something for $1 or $2, just a little thing. And we're going to make a piece of artwork. So I'm cutting a piece of poster board to attach the paper onto. So if I just put the decoupage paper in a frame, you can do that, but I wanted it to be more stable. So I just put decoupage medium on the poster board, misted the back of the paper, and put it on. Then I tested it and realized it was probably just a little too high. So the nice thing again about misting that paper is you can lift it, reposition, and put it down easily without tearing the paper. I didn't have my saran wrap with me, so I just flipped it over and used the brayer to get them to be so the frame was gold, and I wanted it to be able to go well with like that metal that was on the little box that we did. So I took the bronze and put it over top. I did it thin, and it ended up, I think, did 2 coats. And then the zinc glaze to try to get down into all the those crevices in the trim. And you just have to sort of play back and forth to get as dark as you like it. I put it on if your rag's a little too wet, you might wipe off a little too much. Just add a little more. just gluing down those last two edges. Decoupage medium. Nothing fancy there, obviously, just rubbing it on with my fingers. Now for it to dry, and then it can just go in the frame. Next was just a regular little glass votive holder. Put the medium on the glass, and then just mist the paper. Don't soak it like that, just mist it. You want enough to have it be all wet, but even though it was a little too wet and I had to dab it off, it still worked just fine. It just gets more fragile if you get it too wet. There, I just tore the edge a little bit so it wouldn't be just a straight line. And I put a coat of medium over the top. Fine grit sandpaper trims that edge right off after it's completely dry. If you do it while it's wet, you're going to get tears down into where you want to keep the paper. And always do it in a downward motion, because if you pull it up, you'll lift your paper. Added a little bit of the bronze metallic just to the edge, like how they always used to do gold-rimmed glasses. I added glass top coat. I felt this one needed to have a little bit of shine to it. I let that dry, and then I decided it needed a little something more, so I used the Paint Couture 2-part crackle. First coat goes on, and after you let it dry, and once it gets tacky, then you put the second coat on. And depending on how thick you put it, determines how your crackle is. The thicker you go, the more crackle you get. The hard part is waiting the 6 to 8 hours for that part to dry. But the longer you wait, the better it is, because it takes the drying process for the crackles to show. So once that's dry, then you put on a glazed top coat, and that gets down into those cracks, and it will show your crackle. I did it with bronze, and then you can see they're showing, but I wanted it a little deeper, so then I got out the Verde green and I tried some of that. Because I wanted everything to be an aged look, going that dark wasn't bad. And it might have shown up more if I had done that originally and not had the bronze be on there first, because the bronze filled the gap, those little crack lines. But I'm not sure. I would have to do it again in the same process to see. But I like the way it turned out. What do you think? So the last thing, I had this saucer they were like a child's china set. And I figured it would be a cute addition to this little vignette. This is from the Seeds transfer set. hindsight, I should have done all the work that I wanted to do on the dish to make the colors match better, because once I got it going, I decided more needed to be done to make the colors blend together better. So I should have done all of that first and then put the transfers on. You'll see as we go what I mean. But it was more the iridescence of that plate in the white area, and that maroon color just wasn't, it was a little too purple for the rest of the pieces. So I was using the bronze just to pull the colors in together, and I thought it would be nice little highlights on those roses. And this is my first thought, to try to soften down the tone of that edge, plus bring the metallic look through more of the plate. This is the Verde green glaze. I decided to add a little bit to those leaves. There I had just compared the two colors and decided I didn't like them together. So now I'm trying a little bit of the, I think that's the amber honey glaze, to try to tone that down. And you'll see as the glazes go on, the roses sort of got a little too muted. That's what I mean. I would have probably in hindsight gone and done them in the opposite order. And since I had crackled the votive, I decided, oh, let's crackle this little saucer too. Paint Couture glazes are actually a top coat in themselves. That's why I didn't have to do a separate top coat over top of that before the crackle. Now to let it dry. So after it dried, I used the bronze and then panicked because it was the paint, not glaze. So I just grabbed the clear glazing base, medium, and spread that around with it, hoping they would grab each other and mix, and it didn't turn out too bad. See, it was still able to pull back. Just was probably a little more thick than it would have been. But I like the way it turned out. And this is the set all together. If you like the way it looked, please comment, like, share the video with friends. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you again soon.